بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين ألف لام ميم
إلهي عظم البلاء وبرح الخفاء وانكشف الغطاء وانقطع الرجاء أضاقت الأرض ومنعت السماء وأنت المستعان وإليك المشتكى وعليك المعول في الشدة والرخاء اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد أولي الأمر الذين فرضت علينا طاعتهم وعرفتنا بذلك منزلتهم ففرج عنا بحقه فرجا عاجلا قريبا كلمح البصر أو هو أقرب يا محمد يا علي يا علي يا محمد اكفياني فإنكما كافيان وانصراني فإنكما ناصران يا مولانا يا صاحب الزمان الغوث 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 أدركني 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 الساعة 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 العجب 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 يا أرحم الراحمين بحق محمد وآله الطاهرين.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والحمد حقه كما يستحقه حمدا كثيرا ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وحبيبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين سيما بقية الله في الأراضين وحجته على الخلائق أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. Respected viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, with yet again another exciting week on the Guided Show. This week's topic is General Islamic Rulings. Relates back to the picture on the poster, which is a police officer pretty much putting the law into perspective. Today we have with us our guest speaker, Sayyid Mustafa Al-Mudarrisi. Sayyid, Assalamu alaikum.
Alaykum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
We thank you for coming on the show with us once again.
Pleasure to be here again, and thank you for having me.
Jazakumullah khair. So pretty much today's topic is something that we're going to try and be doing very regular, very often. It's just based around your general Islamic rulings, things that relate to day-to-day life, things that we all go through, even things that we tend to debate with amongst one another, and even questions that come up in gatherings. So inshallah, we will cover many of those questions today, and inshallah, as time permits within the future, such questions will also be answered. However, as per usual, we will begin with a brief introduction, and then inshallah we will move straight into the questions. Sayyid, tfaddal.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير خلقه أجمعين محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين وحجته على الخلائق أجمعين الحجة بن الحسن فداه أرواح العالمين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. First of all, allow me to offer my condolences on the sorrows of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam in this month. It's the month of pain and agony for the progeny of the Prophet. And secondly, allow me to give a very brief introduction into tonight's discussion. Our seventh Imam, Imam Musa ibn Ja'far al-Kadhim alayhi salam, encapsulates knowledge in its entirety in 4 sentences. He says, وَجَدْتُ عِلْمَ النَّاسِ. All the knowledge out there can be summarized in 4 words. Number 1, to know your Lord, to know your Creator, to know your Sustainer, and to be acquainted with His attributes, to know that He is kind, to know that He is wise, to know that He is all knowledgeable, to know that He is all powerful, and to know that He is just, and to know that He is in charge. Knowing these things would impact the way we behave ourselves. This would shape our behavior. And number 2, to know what He's done to you, to know about the grace that He immersed you in, to know how kind He's been to us since the inception of time. And if you want to know more about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done to us, His relationship with us, I would refer you to the supplication of Imam al-Hussein on the day of Arafah and the supplication of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, Dua Abi Hamza al-Thumali. Number 3, the Imam says, to know what He wants from you. There are a lot of people that acknowledge the existence of God. They believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. However, Allah to them has nothing to do with their lives. Yes, it's a necessity to believe in God because He fills a huge void, a huge gap in their lives, but He has nothing to do with how they live. But then you have the people that believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has plans for us. He's got injunctions, He's got do's and don'ts, but they don't follow God's orders. Then you have the people that acknowledge the existence of God. They're theists, they believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has do's and don'ts, and they follow the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because everything that God created has a purpose, and everything in this world is serving the purpose of its creation. Every cell in the universe, every animal, everything is serving the purpose that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created it for, except for humans, because we have free will. Now there are ways to gain the satisfaction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and when we try to gain His satisfaction, we're not just trying to please Him, because He doesn't need us to please Him, but this is how we can gain ultimate salvation. And number 4, the Imam says, to know what would make you go astray and leave your religion. Because you might be performing all the rituals, you might be following the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we have to bear in mind that there are things that we could do that would make us leave the boundaries of religion. You might be praying, you might be fasting, but do things that would negate fasting, that would negate salah.
Ahsan Sayyid.
Ahsan Allah alayk.
So Sayyid, we'll get straight into the questions. And viewers, the questions are in no particular order. So please don't feel like we've categorized questions in a certain way to target a certain gender and whatnot. Just as the questions are, we ask them as they come in, or as the questions come up. So inshallah said, we'll begin with the first question. Very important question, very relevant to today's society, something that many people argue about. Is a female allowed to perform wudu with nail polish? If not, why so? Is there any means behind the barrier?
Classic first world problem. Although I don't think that this poses a huge challenge, but as you said, this is very relevant, and especially women in the society, they see this as an obstacle. They want to pray, they want to take wudu, but to use nail polish, to wear nail polish, would create a barrier. Why it creates a barrier? Because when we examine the Quran, we find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this does not pertain to women, this is not exclusive to women only, this applies to men as well. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says that if you get up to pray, you need to perform wudu. إِذَا قُمْتُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ. You need to wash your face. So if there's something on your face, you need to remove it. Why? Because water needs to reach your skin. If there is a barrier, if there is a veil that prevents the water from reaching the skin, then you're not fulfilling this obligatory act. You're not implementing the verse. If it's an injury, it's a different story. But if it's not an injury, if it's something that would just prevent water from reaching the skin, you need to remove it. Now when it comes to nail polish, I believe most nail polishes, they prevent the water from reaching the nail and the skin. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that you need to wash your face and you need to wash your hands. فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ, including the elbows. So all this area needs to be covered, needs to be washed. If this is not done properly, yes, I know some people say that the means are not important. What's important is to establish that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What's important is to pray to God, to tap into that inner Buddha. But we believe that the form is as important as the essence. At the end of the day, if we want to fulfill our servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we need to implement everything that He has told us. We need to follow the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is very clear. It's a Quranic verse, and it's not a hadith. It's a Quranic verse that says that you need to wash that area. You need to wash your hands. So if there's something that would prevent the water from reaching the skin, from reaching the nail, then that's problematic. You need to remove it to be able to implement God's order.
Mm-hmm. Ahsan Sayyid. So just a couple of notes on that. So as we were speaking earlier, so the majority of people that do that do wudu with the nail polish, they say that, for example, the marja that they follow allows them to, because it's such like an insignificant amount of the part that's being washed, for example, so it doesn't nullify the wudu. Or you've got other people that, for example, say that may wear this thing that's called like a shellac, which is like a gel mixed with a nail polish of some sort, and it's literally like a thick layer almost over the nail, so it's like a step beyond the nail polish means. If we can just note on that, and just to show people that if your marja is saying one thing, you can't automatically link something else that's similar to what he said under the same ruling, because it obviously changes with time. So if we can just comment on that from a religious aspect, where even if a marja may say something, you can't automatically link something that is similar to it to the same ruling without obviously asking the question directly.
Exactly. And also when a marja responds to a question, it's usually general in nature. So they tell you that anything that prevents the water from reaching the skin is haram. Now, who determines that? The urf determines that. With shellac, because it's permanent, I think the problem is if it's a permanent thing, then to initially do it is haram. But then because you can't remove it, then you have to perform jabira. It's like when you have an injury, you have to, if you can, if the doctor allows you to do it, you just cover that that wound with something, with a sheet, and then you perform wudu over it. So with this, just like certain things that women do these days, when it becomes permanent, they have to take wudu, they have to perform wudu al-jabira. But initially what they did was haram. So to do something to prevent the water from reaching the skin on a permanent basis, or as you mentioned, that sometimes it's not permanent,
yeah.
but it could.
But it's
last
obviously
for
it's
a
a
few
longer
months,
fixture than nail polish, yeah.
Yeah, so they have to take in mind that the initial act was haram, but then they have to perform jabira to basically bypass the that obstacle that they've placed.
Ahsan, Sayyid. Sayyid, so moving on. Another big problem. Males, because you see a lot of males also doing it, so we can't subject this question to females. Are males/females allowed to pluck the eyebrows under any circumstances? And if so, are there any conditions tied to this?
Well, in general, yes, men and women are allowed to remove their facial hair, with the exception for men, they can't shave their beards. But with women, in principle, they are. There's nothing wrong with it. Beauty is part of a woman's existence. However, there are conditions. There are secondary rulings. For example, for the woman, because it's considered zina, or if it's considered zina, sorry. Because before the maraja used to say that this is considered zina. This is why when you pluck the eyebrows, you need to cover your face when you go outside.
If you can, sorry, just define zina just for the non-English speakers.
Zina, there's a verse in the Quran that says, وَلَا يُبْدِينَ زِينَتَهُنْ. They shouldn't expose, they shouldn't show their ornament. They shouldn't show their beauty to an mahram. So, back in the day, the Maraja used to say that this was a form of zina, a form of ornament, and if they do it, because they're allowed to do it in principle, and they're allowed to show their face to their maharim, to other women, but when it comes to ana mahram, this is problematic. Sayyid Sistani's fatwa is not as strict. So he says that plucking the eyebrows is not haram and it's not considered a zina. But if it becomes a zina, if it's done with the intention of attracting the attention of the opposite gender, or if you do it in a way, like color it in a way, or the shape of it becomes in a way that would attract the attention of the opposite gender, then it becomes haram. Mm-hmm. And some ulama say that it sometimes depends on the woman. So if the woman becomes super attractive when she plucks the eyebrows, then this would if this creates a fitna, it becomes haram as well. So Sayyid Sistani's fatwa is that you're allowed to do it unless if it becomes a form of zina that you're revealing. Especially that men usually, if they don't have taqwa, they judge a woman based on her beauty, and the view is a perverted view. This is why we have to be extra vigilant when it comes to these things, because this has to do with a woman's chastity, and a woman's chastity is reflected on her life, on her future. This is why taking these things into consideration is important.
Ahsan Sayyid.
Assalamu alaikum.
Sayyid, so moving on from the facial things and the bodily things, with foods these days, whether it's chips, lollies or snacks, everyone's into their late night movies and snacks and whatnot. So one may automatically ask, there's a thing that's called E-codes. It's all these E626 and E26 and all these sorts of numbers that are related, which obviously relate back to certain ingredients within food. So even though the ingredients may be there, these numbers also mean something. The question is one required to look into the E-codes in foods prior to eating them?
In short, Sayyid Sistani says no. There is no need to investigate. You don't need to probe the ingredients of a product that you're consuming. However, when it comes to meat and the things that are derived from animal products, if you know for sure that this is an animal product, then you have to make sure that it's halal for you to consume. Apart from that, no, you don't need to probe, you don't need to. Even Sayyid Sistani says that if you think that the people handling the food when preparing it, there's a high probability that they've touched it while their hands were wet. So even if there is a chance that they've might have handled the food. Now, when it comes to the people of the book, Sayyid Sistani says that they're tahir. But for example, if you're in China and you know that the majority of the people, of the Chinese people are not, they don't believe in God, then they would become najis, they would become impure. So even if there is a chance that they might have handled the food, they might have touched the food while their hands was wet, he says that this is not something that you need to probe. This is not something that you need to investigate. This is the jurisprudential ruling with regards to the codes and to the ingredients in general. But I think there's something that we need to take into consideration for people that live in the West. I think it's a good thing. Even though there is a discussion about al-athar al-wad'i, whether or not when you consume something that is haram and you're not aware of its hurma, the fact that it's forbidden, whether or not this will have any impact on your spirituality, on your soul. Because some say that it will, some say that it won't have any impact. And the people that argue that it will have impact on the soul, they say that these are natural consequences. It's like when you drink alcohol and you're not, and if you were not aware that this was alcohol, this will make you drunk. Yep. This will make you intoxicated, even if you don't know if it's. So these are natural consequences, but others say these are not natural consequences. Anyway, so there is a debate. The disagreement between the ulama in this regard. But I think, one of the mu'mineen, he says that whenever I go to a supermarket, I usually read the ingredients. He says, so my children, they for example, see a lollipop, and they bring it to me, and they say, Baba, is this halal or is this haram? To instill that idea that we have red lines when it comes to food. He says, when I tell them, I read the ingredients and there is gelatin in it, for example, I tell them it's haram, even though they like it, they're children, but the moment you tell them it's haram, they just leave it straight away. So when it comes to these coatings, if you know, for example, something has gelatin, and usually the gelatin is derived from animal sources. If you're not sure, in certain countries, they don't, specify the source of the gelatin. Yeah. If they don't specify it, so there is a chance that the gelatin has been derived from a vegetarian source, this becomes halal. You don't need to probe, you don't need to ask. because you're not sure that this has been derived from
Haram source.
haram source, from meat, because you need to probe, you need to investigate further if it's taken from an animal product, animal source. But we know, for example, here in Australia, and maybe even in the US, most probably in the US, when they write gelatin, or if there is a code for gelatin, I think some of the emulsifier, like 471, is a reference to the emulsifier, which is a form of fat. With fat and with meat, the same ruling applies. If it's from animal source, they just write gelatin or 471. But if it's derived from halal source, from vegetarian source, they usually state it. Either because it's more difficult to derive it, it's easier to derive it from animal sources. But if it's vegetarian, because they're appealing to all the vegetarians and all the vegans in the country, they would make sure that they write the emulsifier has been derived from soy, or the gelatin has been taken from vegetarian sources. So if that's the case, like the norm is that they derive it from animal sources, then you should probe, you should investigate it to make sure that this is not meat, this is halal. Yeah. So.
But with regards to that, if there's a doubt, because I believe Sayyid Sistani's ruling says that if there's a doubt if it's come from vegetarian based or animal based, would you then not necessarily need to look into it as long as there's a doubt? Because if we go with the notion that you've just mentioned, where you need to probe into it and look deeper, does that not differ from the ruling of if you're not sure, eat it? If you're sure, don't eat it. Do you know what I mean? So the question is one required to look into it if it, for example, just says gelatin without stating where it's from? Because as you said, more or likely it's going to be a haram source because it hasn't been specified as soy for the vegans. But if you just, flip a packet of lollies and you see gelatin without anything else on it, are you required to look into it and that becomes haram until you actually are certain about it? Or can you just eat it with the assumption that, I don't know, maybe they put it as vegetarian, maybe they didn't, I don't know, but I'm just going to consume it?
Well, with respect to if you're not sure, you leave it. If you're sure, you can eat it. This is called a shubha sometimes, and it's not obligatory upon us to observe these precautionary measures. The ruling says that it's halal. It's halal, but again, with gelatin, because I know here in Australia, when they write gelatin without specifying the source, it's usually haram. It's usually taken from animal source. But in other areas, in other places where they don't state if it's vegetarian or not, I think, for example, Coles, if they usually, they have this V sign on any product that they sell, if it's suitable for vegetarian, because they're appealing to that market. But that's the case in Australia. But if you're in doubt, if you're genuinely in doubt, and you have reasons to doubt that this could be taken from halal sources, but they haven't stated that on the package, then it's halal for you to consume it. I know Sayyid Sadiq al-Rawhani, he's a famous jurist, a senior jurist in Qom. When he was asked about gelatin, he said that it's halal for you to eat it because there is gelatin that is derived from halal sources. But this depends on determining whether the gelatin, whether they usually specify or not. Again, so in Australia they usually specify. If you can find a gelatin where they don't specify and it's taken from vegetarian sources, and this becomes rampant and prevalent, I think we can implement this ruling and say that it's halal for you to consume it. But in Australia, it's difficult.
Yeah.
I find it problematic to assume that it has been derived from vegetarian sources when in 99% of the cases, maybe not 99%, because even when it's 99% of the times, then there is a chance it could be halal. But we say that it's derived from animal sources unless proven otherwise. That's the case in Australia. This has been the case, but I don't know if this has changed. If things change, then we will change the fatwa accordingly as well.
Ahsan Sayyid.
Assalamu alaikum.
Sayyid, shaking hands of the opposite gender, is this permissible? If one is compelled to do so, to what extent does he or she need to be prior to this becoming okay?
Well, touching the skin of of the opposite gender who happens to be a non-mahram is not permissible. But this fatwa is not based on this general notion. We have specific hadith that state that you're not allowed to shake hands with the opposite gender. Now, when it comes to Sayyid Sistani, he is asked multiple times about if we're cornered, if we're in a situation where it would be very weird, very disrespectful to not shake hands. Sayyid Sistani is strict. He says that only under extreme circumstances, if you're facing an extreme hardship, for example, you're a real estate agent, and if you don't shake hands, you'll lose your job. And when you lose your job, you can't find an alternative, then you're allowed to shake hands. So this is considered an extreme, circumstances. But Sayyid Sistani says that you can, because you're not allowed to touch the skin of the opposite gender. If you wear gloves, and if it's okay socially to wear gloves and shake hands, then this is an alternative. You're not forced to shake hands with them and touch their skin. Otherwise, it's haram. And I believe sometimes we think that it's a difficult situation I'm in, but Sayyid Sistani says لا يتحمل عادة, a situation where usually people can't tolerate it. I remember a guy asked me, he's a barber, he says that sometimes a woman comes into my shop and she wants me to cut her hair, and obviously it's haram. So he says that if I tell her no, this would be, I would be in a difficult spot. So I said, is it haraj shadid? Is it like extremely difficult for you to say no? He said yes. There was another barber who worked with him. He said, no, it's not haraj. I could tell her that I'm not trained to cut a woman's hair. As simple as that. So it's not what you regard as a difficult situation. If it's a extreme situation where usually people can't overcome, can't tolerate, that then it becomes permissible. And when you look at people from other communities, Haj Ali, like the Jewish community, Orthodox Jews, they're not allowed to shake hands with the opposite gender. And I remember I saw this documentary about this Jewish rabbi in the UK who was receiving knighthood from the Queen, and he told the people in charge of the ceremony, he said that I can't shake hands with the Queen. And it's a tradition that before she gives him the award, she has to shake hands. So they told him that we will tell the Queen, but if she chose to extend her hand, then this is something that it would be extremely disrespectful to disrespect the Queen, basically. So he said, I went there, and even though she would give the award to the guests, and not talk to them, just give them the awards, and they leave the stage. He said, when it came to me, and they show the footage, when it came to me, as a respect to my faith and my religion, she said she began to converse with me. She had a small conversation with him. I can't shake your hands, but I would talk to you instead. So I think that these are easy things to observe. But this question is only relevant to pre-COVID-19 era.
Definitely.
Now, and I think for the for the long term, this will not be a problem for the Muslims.
Ahsan Sayyid. Sayyid, being in an enclosed space alone with the opposite gender of whom hold other than a mahram position, is this permissible? Are there any conditions?
Well, we have multiple narrations that state if you're alone with the opposite gender in a confined place, then you will have company, and the company is the shaitan himself. The shaitan will definitely come and whisper in your ears to engage in a sinful act. Now we have two opinions. one opinion says that it's haram. It's haram even to be alone in an elevator with a woman. It's haram. Why? Because men in general, again, if they're not muttaqi, then they're perverts. The first thing that comes to their mind, and again, this is satanic. It's like a hunter seeing a sitting duck. He takes advantage of a situation like this. He's been preparing for this. Even if you're a mu'min, he's been preparing for this. He's swimming in our veins, as the hadith says. And when he sees you alone with a woman, he whispers the wrong thoughts in your mind. But there are scholars that say that only when you're not certain, when you're not certain that you will not engage in sin, that's when it becomes haram. And one of the people that has this opinion is Ayatollah Sayyid Sistani. But it's ironic how the Sayyid replies to these questions. So for example, they ask him, am I allowed to be with my cousin? My cousin, he lives with us, and sometimes my parents leave. Is it okay for me to be alone with him in the same house? The Sayyid says, no, unless if you're certain that you will not commit a sin with him. But then when they ask him, for example, if my grandmother then is in the house and I have my cousin who is also visiting and I want to go and buy food for him, is it okay? The Sayyid said, yes, as long as you are certain that a sin will not be committed. So the criteria is the same. If you're certain that a sin will not be committed, and by sin I don't mean zina. By sin, because the hadith says every limb, every organ has its share of zina. So for example, being flirtatious, flirting with a woman that is not mahram to you. The hadith says for every word, it's outrageous, I don't want to mention the hadith, but it just reveals to you the magnitude of this sin. Or for example, looking at her with lust. These are all haram acts that we shouldn't engage in. But again, there are situations, especially here in the West, where you are 100% sure that a sin will not be committed. For example, you go to see a doctor and you're alone in a confined place and the door is closed. But you know that haram will not be committed. Or for example, your grandmother is living in the house and she's 80 and you have a plumber who came to work in the house. You're 100% sure that a sin will not be committed. So if you're certain that a sin is not going to be committed, then it's halal for you to be alone with the opposite gender. Otherwise, if there is a chance, then it becomes haram.
Ahsan, Sayyid. Sayyid, am I allowed to pick and choose between who I want to follow as a marja for different rulings that suit me, or is there a process that must be followed?
Okay, so the popular opinion is that you're supposed to follow the most learned, the most knowledgeable marja. So if you find, for example, Sayyid Sistani, he's an expert in moon sighting. He's definitely the a'lam in this field. And then you find another marja like Ayatollah Wahid Khurasani. He's an expert in salat and in sawm, fasting and praying. The fatwa is you should follow Sayyid Sistani in moon sighting, and you should follow Ayatollah Wahid Khurasani in the rulings pertaining to salat and to fasting. So this is the popular opinion of the maraja. There are other maraja that believe in tab'idh. One of them is Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Taqi al-Mudarrisi. He says that as long as you're following a jurist, of course he needs to tick all the other boxes. For example, he needs to be a muttaqi and he needs to be an expert in the field. But as long as he's a jurist and he ticks the other boxes, then you can follow him in one area and follow another marja in another area, as long as they all fulfill the criterias. So this is his opinion, but he says that it should be based on desire. Only because I like this type of food and he allows it, he permits it, then I will follow this marja. No, for example, one marja says that it only becomes wajib upon a girl to start fasting and praying when she reaches physical maturity. And you have other maraja that say no, by the time she reaches the age of 9, she becomes mukallafa, baligh, and she has to. So it's not based on desire. You have a daughter and you think that she's too young, she's not mature enough to fast, then you follow this marja' that allows it. So Sayyid Mudarrisi's opinion is that you can practice tab'il and follow the marja' that you want, but it should be based on what I desire and what I like.
Ahsan, Sayyid.
Assalamu alaikum.
Sayyid, very interesting question. Undertaking acts of nature, so 1 and 2, let's call it, in a place where one does not have permission to do so, is this permissible?
No, definitely it's haram. It's definitely haram. When it comes to relieving ourselves, we have religious guidelines, and this is something that some people don't understand. For example, facing the Qibla. It's haram for you to face the Qibla, not when you know that you're facing the Qibla. You have to make sure that you're not facing the Qibla when 1 and 2 is done. So these are some of the guidelines. And one of the guidelines is that if it's a private land, if it's not, if the owner of the land doesn't allow you, it becomes haram, as simple as that.
Ahsan, Sayyid.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alright, Sayyid. So a lot of people may hate us for this question, but we need to do what we need to do. Tattoos are a very popular thing nowadays. What many don't consider is beyond what the fatwa say in regards to its permissibility. There are other factors involved, such as, do parents approve? Is it done for riyah, which is showing off? Is it depicting a certain drawing or associating a name with Ahlul Bayt alayhum as-salam, and therefore defaming the religion based on the person's conduct? With these in mind, does the answer to getting a tattoo change?
Well, I think we have two types of people that ask this question. You have the people that they already have a tattoo. I'm not speaking to these people because at the end of the day, we all do things that we would regret later on in life. And I'm not judging them here. I'm talking, my answer is to those people that would like to decide to have a tattoo, and they would like to explore this issue from a religious perspective. One thing I find ironic about how Sayyid Sistani replies to this question, usually Sayyid Sistani says it's haram, it's halal. He doesn't, go into explaining why it's haram, why it's halal. He doesn't usually give, an advice on what we should do. He either tells us it's haram or it's halal, or it's makruh or it's mustahab. But when it comes to tattoo, and I believe the reason why he gives this answer, because the amount of questions that he receives regarding tattoo is overwhelming. And this is why he felt that he needs to give an advice. So he says, in principle, getting a tattoo is not haram. But then the Sayyid says that it's detested, it's despised religiously. And we have a hadith regarding tattoo. For example, one hadith says that the voice of the shaitan is music, and the writing of the shaitan is the tattoo. So Sayyid Sistani, he doesn't quote these hadith, but he says that it's detested. Now, when it comes to, in principle, it's halal, but then we have the secondary rulings. And sometimes the secondary ruling overshadows the ruling in principle. For example, is it okay to walk naked in the house? Yes, in principle you're allowed to, but no one can look at you. You can't expose your private parts. So the secondary ruling usually overturns the general ruling, because usually you have people around. So when it comes to tattoo, there are a number of things that we need to take into consideration. You mentioned the consent of the parents. Now, when it comes to this issue, maybe you haven't heard this, or the viewers haven't heard this. In general, it's not wajib to listen to everything that they tell you. But if they tell you something, and if you refuse to listen to them, if you refuse to oblige, and that would upset them, this would become haram. So upsetting your parents is haram. For example, they tell you not to hang around with a certain individual. if they say this because this individual is making you perform haram acts, it becomes haram not because your parents told you. It becomes haram because God has told you this. But if it's because, for example, they're not in good terms with the parents of that person, but then you go out with that person, hang around with that person, without them knowing that you hang around with that person. So this is not upsetting them. If it's not upsetting them, it's halal for you to hang around with that person. So if, and I'm sure getting a tattoo would, they would be informed of that because they would see you with a tattoo. If this would upset them, this becomes haram. And if it becomes haram due to upsetting your parents, this is one of the main reasons why we become miserable in life. So this is why it's important to please our parents. And you should bear in mind that tattoo is now very popular in this day and age. God knows what will happen in the future and what will become popular in the future when you have kids. So make sure you please your parents, because if you please them, your children will please you as well. And be considerate to them. Try to understand them the same way you want your kids to understand you when they grow up. And this is one of the secondary rulings pertaining to tattoo. And also, for example, they ask the Sayyid that if you tattoo the image of say Imam Ali on your body, but then this would be disrespectful, or this would violate the sanctity of Imam Ali alayhi salam, this becomes haram. Or for example, if you have the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tattooed on your skin, and I've seen some people that have not the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I've seen a guy with the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on his back. And the people that have the names of the ma'soomeen, some say that it's the names of ma'soomeen, if it's done with the intention of having their names. If it's the name of your friend, his name is Ali, you tattoo his name, there's nothing wrong with it. But if it's the name of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then you have to, when you want to touch the name, you have to perform wudu. But then if you have this tattoo on your skin, you always need to be in a state of wudu. And obviously when you go to the toilet, this will nullify the wudu, so you will be in state of non-wudu when you're having the tattoo on your skin. This makes it haram as well. And you always need to be in state of wudu. So even though that time, because you have the tattoo on your body, you did it initially and it was haram, but now there's nothing you could do about it. But from now on, you always need to be in a state of wudu. So these are some of the secondary rulings that we need to take into consideration. And with women, if it becomes a zina, if you're beautifying yourself and you're showing it to the na-mahram, it becomes haram as well. So if you have it on your hands, you have to wear gloves all the time. So this makes life difficult. Especially that when you grow up, you might change your mind. Now you're not religious, you grow up, when you're older, you become religious, and you have to deal with something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not pleased with.
Ahsan Sayyid. So Sayyid, just a few more questions to go, inshallah.
Sure.
Touching the words of the Quran without wudu, why is this not okay? Does one attain a sin if they were to touch it without wudu?
Absolutely. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has certain holy things. His house is holy. The Kaaba is holy. When the Masjid al-Haram becomes holy, you're not allowed to enter the Masjid al-Haram when you're in a state of janaba, for example. And even though when you're in a state of janaba, you're allowed to pass by a mosque. If you want to put something in the mosque, you want to take something from the mosque, you're in a state of janaba. If it's an ordinary mosque, you're allowed to do it. But when it comes to Masjid al-Haram, you're not allowed to enter inside Masjid al-Haram. And you have the Prophet is holy. And when the Prophet becomes holy, there are certain rituals that we need to observe, certain red lines when it comes to the Prophet. For example, every time you mention his name, you have to say, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. It's wajib. And we have certain scholars that say that if it wasn't, some ulama say it's wajib, and some say that if it wasn't for the fact that sometimes Imam Zayn al-Abidin, when he mentions the name of the Prophet in Sahif al-Sajjadiyya, he doesn't say sallallahu alayhi wa alih, we would have, issued an injunction saying that it's wajib to mention his name whenever, to say Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad whenever you mention his name. And you have the progeny of the Prophet, and you have the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The hadith says that if you respect the book of God, it's like respecting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because these are the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is a verse in the Quran that says لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. Even though we believe that the inner meaning of this verse applies to the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. They are the mutahhar, they are the infallible creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are the ones that have access to the Quran. But some people, they use this verse, and we have numerous hadith in this regard as well, that say that you're not allowed to touch the Quran if you haven't performed wudu. You have to be in state of tahara to be able to touch the words of the Quran. If it's covered with a sheet, with a nylon, with something transparent, where you wouldn't be touching the words, you would be touching that sheet, it becomes permissible. Otherwise, it would be haram if you touch it if you're not in a state of wudu.
Also, if you're not in a state of wudu, there is the exemption of the cover itself, I believe, and then obviously the page. So if you grab the corner of the page and flip it,
it's okay.
As long as you're not touching the words.
Touching the words, ahsantum. And they say, the fatwa says that even if the verse is not in the Quran, it's in a book, but it's a verse from the Quran, it becomes haram to touch it, even if it's one word. But if for example the sentence is a sentence that you're using, it's not part of the Quran. You know how some people, they speak with the Quran because they've memorized the Quran, so they use the verses to ask people to do certain things. If it's not the Quran that they're reciting, if it's not part of the Quran, it all depends on your intention. Then it's okay for you to touch it. But if your intention was to use this word, this Quranic word, then it becomes haram for you to touch it, even if it's not in the Quran. If it's in another book as well.
Ahsan Sayyid.
Assalamu alaikum.
Sayyid, this one obviously relates more to the males. Urinating while standing. This is something that many don't quite understand, or let alone avoid doing. Why is this the case? Like, why is there so much negative talk with regards to men doing that while standing?
Well, it's definitely detested religiously. In fact, we have a hadith that states that half of the reason why people are punished in the grave, because we have a hadith that most people will be punished, will be pressed in the grave. Half of the reason why people are pressed in the grave is because they urinate while they're standing. And it's very common because it's a cultural thing, especially in this part of the world. Health-wise, it's not recommended. It's not haram. Some scholars they justify this hadith because the hadith is strong. Half of the punishment of the grave is because of it. They say it's because of the tahara and najasa aspect. When you urinate while you're standing, chances are this will splash on you, and then you either need to purify yourself, you need to take a shower, you need to change your pants, or if you don't do it, then obviously this would nullify the salat. So this is how they justify it, but the hadith itself, it doesn't say why. It just says that it's so despised and it's so detested. But at the end of the day, it's not haram. It's not haram. You could do it and then wash yourself, take a shower, whatever, if it splashes on you. But I think that it's not only about the halal and the haram. There are things that that have consequences and we shouldn't engage in, even when they're not haram, when they're makruh.
Yeah, definitely.
For example. Yeah.
Ahsan Sayyid.
Ahsan.
Sayyid, is a non-Muslim allowed to enter a mosque?
Well, back to the Quran question. My brother Sayyid Mehdi, he was going to the US and he had a copy of the Quran in his bag. So the customs officer, he was searching his bag and he saw the Quran. He says that I know that because I'm not a Muslim, I'm not pure enough to touch it. So my brother said to him that It's not just because you're not a Muslim. Even with Muslims, there are conditions. If they're in a state of janaba, if they haven't performed wudu, it's haram for them to touch it. Now, with non-Muslims, there are scholars, and I think they're a minority, that say that if there is a necessity, for example, you want to fix something in the mosque and you don't know any Muslims that can do this, you're allowed to bring a non-Muslim to fix it, to enter inside the mosque. But the majority of ulama say it's haram. And I think one of the obvious reasons is because they're in a state of janaba. When you become a Muslim, one of the first things that you do is perform a ghusl. But the fatwa doesn't say it's because of that. They say that they're not allowed to enter inside the mosque if they're not Muslims. That's the general fatwa.
Ahsan, Sayyid.
Assalamu alaikum.
Sayyid, we mentioned riya before, so pretty much in technical terms, showing off. Is it haram if done with the intention of showing what you have or what you are doing is better than others?
So just to brag about what you're doing?
Yeah, like to brag about something you may have or something you're doing, or to pray in a certain way. So someone, for example, says like, oh, well, this guy's the stuff, you know what
Definitely, this is haram. In fact, there is a hadith that says that if you, for example, you go to Hajj, you spend a lot of money and you put a lot of effort, you perform pilgrimage, and then you come back, and you're not mentioning a story, because after you come back from Hajj, you'll have a lot of stories. You're not mentioning a story, you just want to brag about going to Hajj. The hadith says that the first time you mention it, all the thawab will be gone.
Wow.
Yes. And then the second time that you mention it, instead of thawab, they will be giving you iqab. They will be giving you sins for bragging about a ritual that you have to perform with sincerity for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But sometimes we mix between riya, because sometimes it's good, especially when it comes to the wajibat. It's okay for you to be vocal about you fasting, because it's a wajib. Everyone needs to fast. Every Muslim needs to fast. You pray because it's a wajib, so it's okay to stand in front of everybody else and pray. As long as you're not doing it for them, you're doing it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But for others to see you, there's nothing wrong with it. Especially if you're encouraging others. Because some people, they feel weak. They're studying, they're, for example, in a university campus or in the work environment, and they find it difficult to pray in front of everybody else, in front of non-Muslims. When you stand and pray and you would encourage them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might even reward you for this act. But the hadith says that if al-mura'i, a person that just wants to show off, wants to be boastful about his ibadat, will be given a number of titles on the Day of Judgment. Ya munafiq, ya ghadir, ya fajr. Because you've put the effort, but the effort was put not to gain the satisfaction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but to gain the satisfaction of other people. And I think it's difficult to purify your intention, but I think especially when you want to pray, because it always fixes your image in the eyes of the people. Being religious gives a good image, gives a good reputation. But I think one of the ways to solve this issue is to remind yourself that if I'm doing the salat for this guy, how is this guy going to help me? Especially when I die. This is why some people say that when I want to say Allahu Akbar, I picture myself being prayed on Salat al-Janazah. This is when we will need these a'mal. So do it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not worth it to do it for other people. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment will say, go reap the reward from that person that you did these a'mal for.
Ahsant. Sayyid, last question. Inshallah, we'll wrap it up. Are finance and loans permissible to take out considering the verse in the Holy Quran about riba?
Well, in general, riba is not allowed. You're not allowed to take usury, to give usury in any way, shape or form. However, we have exceptions. For example, riba bayn al-walidi wal-walad. if a father wants to take riba from his son. He gives him a loan, takes riba from him. It's okay. And I think one of the reasons why this is okay is because your father is the source of your existence. He owns you, basically. Of course, there are people that take advantage of this. I'm not talking about them, but in general, his right upon you is extraordinary. One of the exceptions, if you're dealing with a non-Muslim, if you're dealing with a non-Muslim, you're allowed to take a loan. But Sayyid Sistani says, and this is the fatwa of Sayyid Sistani, there are other scholars that say it's haram. Some say that it's okay for you to take a loan if it's a necessity. For example, you need a car, and to be able to live in this country, to survive in this country, you need to buy a car, and you don't have the means, you can take a loan and buy a car. So these ulama, they stipulate that because it's a necessity, then you have to observe the limits. You're not allowed to buy a super expensive car. The car that you need costs $5,000, $10,000, and not more. You're not allowed to buy a $20,000 car because the loan would be, the interest will correspond with the amount of loan. But Sayyid Sistani says it's okay. It's okay, but you shouldn't do it with the intention of taking a loan. You take the money, but not with the intention of taking a loan where you have to give riba, you have to give interest. Yes, you'll end up paying interest, but you'll be forced to give the interest. So you're not paying it wholeheartedly. Because if you pay it wholeheartedly with the intention of giving interest, this becomes riba. So sometimes it makes a difference if the intention is different. This is why the hadith says, "At-tajar fajr ma lam yatafaqqah fi ad-din." If you want to do business transactions, you're a fajr. You're like a depraved person if you don't know the rulings, if you don't understand what are the red lines. And all the ulama in the first page of their Risala al-Amaliyah, the book of rulings, they state that it's wajib upon everyone to learn the issues that they deal with. For example, you're not going to Hajj. Yes, when you need to go to Hajj, you have to learn the rulings in regards to Hajj. But there are things that you need to learn about. For example, taking a loan, for example, these financial issues. These are things that we need to learn because an intention could change the equation. Mm-hmm. So in a nutshell, this is the answer, according to Sayyid Sistani and the others that don't allow it or say that if it's a necessity, you can take a loan.
Ahsan Sayyid.
Assalamu alaikum, habibi.
Viewers, that's us for today. We hope that the questions have given a wide array of knowledge and aspects and inshallah thoughts that people can think about after the show and whatnot. If you do have any questions in regards to anything, please feel free to either inbox us on the guided Facebook page or feel free to comment on the video, and inshallah we'll try to get around to the specific questions. However, please give us some time, as sometimes some questions do need a bit of research, especially if they're not very common or very specific to an individual. However, we do thank you once again for watching. Once again, if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, because we are also on YouTube Live now, please do. Please share the page. We do want to get the message out to as many people as possible. And for now, inshallah, that is us, and we will see you guys again next week for another exciting topic. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
اللهم إنا نشكو إليك فقد نبينا صلواتك عليه وآله وغيبة ولينا وكثرة عدونا وقلة عددنا وشتة الفتن بنا وتظاهر الزمان علينا وصل على محمد وآله وعنا على ذلك بفتح منك تعجل وبضر تكشف ونصر تعز وسلطان حق تظهر ورحمة منك تجللنا وعافية منك تلبسنا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.